Okay, today we are going to start with we are going to start with medical research and medical ethics. What is ethical and not ethical with respect to the practice of medicine and research involving medical procedures? Okay, medical ethics. First of all, the need for medical ethics. Why is there a need for medical ethics? Why do we have a class in Bible college called Biological Issues? Because this would be unnecessary if we had our proper worldview. Okay, it would be unnecessary if we still had Christian principles and Bible principles underlying the thinking of people in our country. We've lost our biblical worldview. We've even lost a theistic worldview. There is no respect for God, and therefore no respect for human life, no distinguishing of human life. Okay, so it would be unnecessary if we had a proper worldview, if we at least had some remnant of Christian principles and Bible principles in the thinking of our everyday American. Another idea with medical ethics, another reason that we need medical ethics is we're going to get into trouble, more and more trouble, when we view medical decisions and ethical questions in the light of man's reasoning instead of God's truths. Okay, we just said medical ethics would be unnecessary if we still had some Christian basis in our country. All right, then the second idea is we are going to get into more and more trouble, have more and more ethical issues, more and more decisions that are being made because we are basing our decisions on man's reasoning. What did we say with respect to euthanasia? We said that there's no higher law in our country. It's the same two principles. And then we said we had a change in our judicial system. More and more, what is legal and illegal in our country, or what's right and wrong in our country, is determined by 9 Supreme Court justices. Or maybe it doesn't make it to the Supreme Court, as in the case of Terry Schiavo. It was decided by a federal judge. Okay, so we're going to get into more and more trouble when we start basing our decisions on man's reasonings. And then, of course, in our country, we're going to get into more and more trouble ethically and morally when what is right and wrong, what is legal or not, is decided by 9 people. Okay? So we're going to get into trouble when we view this in man's reasonings. A couple ideas here. There's no end to what will be justified in the minds of people when we don't have absolute truth of the Bible to base our thinking on. There's no limit. There's no end to what's going to be justified. Okay? Infanticide, it's coming. Euthanasia, it's coming. Okay? Abortion is well established, isn't it? Homosexuality, well established, right? Homosexual marriage, what in the world is that? Okay, it's established in our country today, isn't it? By who, by the way? The Supreme Court, right? Okay, states don't have the right to restrict so-called gay marriage or whatever, but that's an oxymoron, so-called, I don't know. But do you understand where we're going with this? So now we're going to apply those same ideas to medical research and medical ethics. So there's no end to what can be justified. We're going to get into more and more trouble, have more and more things that are unthinkable in the past being legal and even commonplace. So there's no end to what can be justified, and here's another point that should be obvious. It's actually, all of these ethical issues, whether it's abortion or whatever, is all a logical outcome of evolutionary thinking. How did we get here? Said it before in this class. Decades of abandoning God in the Bible. That's always the first idea. Whether we say there's no higher law or wrong worldview, it's the same idea. We've had decades of rejecting God in the Bible. And what's the second half of that? Embracing evolution. So all of these things that we are seeing become legal in our country and becoming commonplace and accepted is the logical outcome of evolutionary thinking. It's just the next step logically. Think about it. If man is nothing more than an animal fighting for survival, what's wrong with driving evolution forward? What's wrong with directing evolution, just like you do with animal breeding? Seriously, if we are nothing more than animals, why not breed humans? That's called eugenics. So I want to spend some time on eugenics. So we're talking about getting into trouble with medical decisions, medical ethics, making decisions regarding human life. We get into trouble when we justify things in light of man's reasoning. And man's reasoning now is all based on what? Evolution. So there's several things that are going to be the result of evolutionary thinking. Okay? Evolutionists like to ignore the social implications of believing in evolution, don't they? But we see historically exactly what happens when we embrace evolution and reject God. There are three things that we're going to be dealing with. First is racism. Racism. Racism is a logical outcome of evolution. How many of you remember from first semester the Scopes trial, 1925 in Dayton, Tennessee? It was all a setup. It was not a real situation. John Scopes was hired to challenge Tennessee law. Okay? Racism is a big part of evolution. Of course, it's not popular to be racist, and it's a big issue. But where did the problem come from? It came from evolution. The textbook John Scopes was using was called Civic Biology by George Hunter. Blatant racism. George Hunter classified the humanity into 5 races, putting Caucasians and people of European descent at the top and people of African descent at the bottom. Races, having different races, is that a biblical concept? Absolutely not. The Bible teaches equality under God, does it not? Okay, racism is evolution. And so the idea is, with evolution, we have different rates of evolving, even among the same species, Homo sapiens. Racism is a direct result of evolutionary thinking. Okay, why do we have problems with race in our country now? It's constantly being excited by the news media, right? By President Obama, etc., making a big deal. Race, different races is not a Bible principle. Okay? We are all descendants of ultimately Adam and Eve, and even, of course, who? Noah. So there is no such thing as 5 races. There is no such thing as the Caucasian race supposedly being the most evolved. Okay? That is direct result of evolutionary thinking. The next thing is called eugenics. And that is something that you may not be familiar with. It's no longer called that, but eugenics. Prefix eu means true or good. Genics, of course, refers to genes or genetics, your hereditary makeup. Eugenics. This is the idea of improving the physical and mental characteristics of the human race. Eugenics, the concept of improving the physical and mental characteristics of the human race. In essence, it's self-directed evolution. Okay, there are two types of eugenics, what is called positive eugenics, and then of course there's negative eugenics. Eugenics is a term and a kind of unknown discipline of biology, first named eugenics by a man named Francis Galton. Okay, British. 1822 to 1911 is his lifespan. Francis Galton, he is the founder of eugenics, gave it its name. He was an agnostic, very antagonistic to Christianity. Of course, we're talking England, 1850s, 1860s, very much the Church of England becoming apostate and its effects on the population very noticeable. He believed that talent, character, and intellect are all inherited and the lack thereof. So humans could and should be selectively bred. He also believed that the poor and lower classes were biologically inferior. What is that? That's racism. Where did Francis Galton get this? Well, he read a book published in 1859 called The Origin of Species, or The Preservation of the Favored Races, written by his cousin, Charles Darwin. Actually, they were half cousins because of the intermarriage there in that family. He, like Charles Darwin, was born into a wealthy family. He was financially set for life, so he was also an amateur scientist. He had all kinds of things going. He studied geology, he studied mathematics. He was influential in the branch of mathematics that we call statistics. Okay? So he, by his own admission, said that the reading of Origin of Species completely changed his scientific focus from the mathematical aspects of statistics into looking into the results of evolution on the human race. And it was after reading Charles Darwin's book that he started studying and even named what he was studying eugenics. Good genes, true genes. Okay? Let me read a quote from Darwin, from Francis Galton. Of course, he's read the book and he's taking Charles Darwin's concept of natural selection, he's taking it the next logical step. And it is a logical step. If we reject God, we reject Bible principles, and we embrace evolution, and we view man as just the highest chain of the evolutionary ladder, these things make sense. Okay? He said, natural selection rests upon excessive production and wholesale destruction. Eugenics rests on bringing no more individuals into the world than can be properly cared for, and only those of the best stock. What does that sound like? It sounds like animal breeding terminology to me. Well, that makes sense. You're nothing more than an animal. So why don't we get rid of the unfit by abortion, infanticide, or euthanasia, and only allow the most talented, who did that? Hitler. It's logical. Only make the best human beings breed and get rid of everybody else. Doesn't that make sense if you are a committed anti-God evolutionist? It does. It is the next step. It is the logical outcome of evolutionary thinking. I mentioned positive eugenics. According to Francis Galton, positive eugenics is to increase the birth rate of the fit. Increase the birth rate of the fit. Well, who decides who's fit and of the best stock? That should be very offensive to all of us. That's positive eugenics. Increase the birth rate of the fit. And then negative eugenics, according to Francis Galton, is to reduce the birth rate of people who impair the improvement of the race. So now we've got racism being applied to genetics and being applied to human beings as if they were cattle. Okay? So the need for medical ethics has become more and more necessary in our country. Why? We've lost our worldview. We've lost the Christian principles that used to be the foundation of our country, used to be the foundation of our government. All right? And then now we are basing our decisions on man's reasonings. And man's reasoning now is completely based on evolutionary thinking. There will be no end to what's justified. Okay? So we have racism, and then we have eugenics, and a third thing that we're going to see is medical ethics boards. You've probably heard of this, and they call them death boards or whatever. There will be people deciding two things. There will be medical ethics boards determining a person's social value. Some of these things are already in place. Okay, we'll have people deciding a person's social value. And this would be based on age, education, and quality of life. And the same thing will be coming to determine who gets medical care. We'll be balancing costs versus worth. You say that won't happen here. It won't. It already happens in the UK and in Germany. Okay? If you are of a certain age and you have certain types of cancer, you will not get treatment. Why? They've decided that basically you're not worth it. Quite literally. Where does that come from? Okay? You see where the ethics of our doctors are going to be heading down this road. Okay? They're not educated at Fairhaven Baptist College, are they? You see what I'm saying? The ethics of our physicians and our people running our healthcare systems are certainly not Bible-based. All right, so we're getting into trouble because we're basing everything on man's reasonings. So there's no end to what can be justified. And we have those three things in our country as a direct result of evolutionary thinking. What are the three things that we see as a direct result of evolutionary thinking? We see racism, we see eugenics, and we see medical ethics board. How many have never heard of eugenics? Never heard of it. That's because it's not something that is called that anymore. Okay? How many have heard of Planned Parenthood? The founder of Planned Parenthood was, guess what? Very strongly convinced of eugenics and very active in promoting it. All right, now we're not going to call it eugenics because that associates us with Nazi Germany. But that doesn't mean we don't have those principles creeping in. All right, so next, historical examples. Historical examples. So we're talking about, we're making our medical decisions, we're viewing ethical questions in light of man's reasonings. So there's no end to what can be justified. And all of those three things are simply the result of evolutionary thinking. They're the outcome logically. When you take evolution to its logical conclusions, you get racism, eugenics, medical ethics boards. Okay? Anybody say Obamacare? That's a scary step because it nationalizes. Do you want our government making those decisions? No. Historical examples. Okay, I said a few minutes ago that evolutionists like to ignore the social implications and the logical outcomes of evolution, of their evolutionary ideas. But history demonstrates that these have a big effect. In history, we have, of course, Nazi Germany. And we have the Jewish Holocaust. But in Nazi Germany, long before the extermination, I hate to use the word, but it's the truth, of the Jews in Nazi Germany and in countries controlled by Germany during World War II, long before that happened, what was happening in Germany? Two things: euthanasia and sterilization protocols. That is what I just called negative eugenics, reducing the birth rate of unfit people. That was done first in Nazi Germany. Of course, we know about the death camps involving Jews, but before that, euthanasia was practiced on mentally handicapped. Euthanasia was practiced on homosexuals and criminals and even people with epilepsy because they were unfit. And then the next step, of course, was to decide that Jewish people were unfit and that they were impairing the improvement of the race, to quote Francis Dalton. Okay? So what Hitler did is simply the logical outcome of evolution, the natural result of rejecting God and Bible principle. So we have, the first thing that happens is we have euthanasia. Euthanasia progresses to sterilization protocols of people who are handicapped, even poor, and criminals. Then that progresses to the Holocaust, okay, which is essentially genocide. And then that progressed to even human experimentation done by Nazi doctors. Okay, why not, if we're going to kill them anyways, why not experiment and learn some things first? That happened. How did that happen? Rejection of God and the Bible and embracing of evolution. If we're nothing more than animals, why not? That's literally a logical outcome of that. Okay, so historical examples, of course, is in Nazi Germany. And you might think, oh, that's in Nazi Germany, not happening here. It did happen here. In the 1920s, 1913 to 1920s, in that time frame, most states in the United States had sterilization protocols for criminals, for mentally handicapped, okay? By that, okay, it's forced sterilization. So that, what are we doing? That negative eugenics. We're reducing the birth rate of people who are unfit, people who impair the evolution of the human race. Happened here. It was happening, okay? Planned Parenthood. All of those things go hand in hand due to rejection of God in the Bible and embracing of evolution. It is logical to think that way. Okay? So we have historical examples, and we also know that it's not limited to Nazi Germany. It wasn't just Hitler. Okay? So in 1913, 1920s, most U.S. states had compulsory sterilization laws, particularly those that were in custody or institutionalized. Okay? Criminals, mentally ill, drug addicts, blind, people with certain diseases, epileptics. Okay? Of course, this was first done in 1933. It was taken further by Hitler during that compulsory sterilization of all German citizens with undesirable handicaps to prevent the contamination of the superior German race. They were also referred to as useless eaters. Okay, all of this is the result of rejecting God, lost the sanctity of human life, and embracing evolution. Of course, then by 1938 to 1945 in Germany, we had 11 million considered subhuman or unworthy of life. This in Germany, this included Jews, Christians, blacks, gypsies, communists, homosexuals, amputees, mental patients. Okay, the Nazis believed they needed to direct the process of natural selection. Where do they get that? Eugenics. Charles Darwin, Francis Galton. Okay, so the concept of improving physical and mental characteristics by what? Selective breeding. Positive eugenics and negative eugenics. All right, so then also in the United States, where are we going with eugenics in the United States today? It's not called eugenics. You've never heard of eugenics, have you? Of course not, because it's blatantly racist. Okay? Genetic engineering is eugenics with updated technology. Now, there's nothing wrong with genetic engineering on plants. You've all heard of what? GMOs, genetically modified. Okay, that's a whole different topic. But what's wrong with genetically modifying plants? Absolutely nothing. That would be proper for us to do, right? We're supposed to subdue the plant kingdom. We're supposed to have stewardship of what God's given us. What about genetic engineering of animals? We've been doing that for a long time. It's called selective breeding. Same with plants, but now we can do it genetically by monkeying with, if you want to use that verb, the DNA of plants and animals. That is genetic engineering. The problem comes in when we apply it to humanity. Then it becomes eugenics, okay? So genetic engineering is eugenics with updated technology when it's applied to human life. Okay, genetic engineering has some good uses. It's going to be very useful in treating disease, but there's certain things that we do not do with genetic engineering. Otherwise, it becomes eugenics with just updated technology. Okay, so, and this again, eugenics, or if we call it whatever it is, whether we're doing it with DNA in a laboratory or we're doing it crudely like the Nazis did, it's the same outcome, okay? So if man is just a collection of genes, and that's how many evolutionists view you, you're just a collection of genes fighting for survival. Why not remake humanity genetically? If that's all we are is genes, that's a logical conclusion. So genetic engineering, of course, has several parts to it. First of all, we have Planned Parenthood. What is that? That's controlled reproduction. That's eugenics, whether we call it that or not. And then we have what's called cloning. There are two types of cloning: therapeutic cloning and reproductive cloning. The last one, of course, is when you would clone an entire human being, which of course is illegal, unethical, and actually not technologically possible yet. Has not been done. Probably won't be done. Okay, so we have genetic engineering. When applied to human life, it is unethical and immoral. Why? Because human life is distinct and separate from animal life. All right, so the need for medical ethics should be unnecessary, but it's the logical result of evolutionary thinking and following man's reasoning instead of God's. So, next point. There are absolutes that we must follow in medical ethics. This is my capital letter C under my first point. The need for medical ethics. First thing is, it would be unnecessary if we still had our Bible foundation, or at least our theistic foundation. And then the next point was, it's just the logical result of following man's evolutionary reasoning. But There are absolutes. There are Bible principles that we can follow so we know what's wrong with stem cell research, what's wrong with in vitro fertilization, and things like that. Okay, so there are absolutes. What are the two lines that should not be crossed? First of all, in making medical decisions and deciding medical ethics, we should never cross the line of God's authority. What did we say in last section? It still applies. God is the giver and taker of life. If we have a proper view of God as our sovereign creator, okay, He is the giver and taker of life. So when we overstep the boundary of God's authority, we are giving man authority that belongs to who? God. So if we're going to be deciding who's fit and unfit, and if we're going to be deciding we should manipulate the genetic composition of the human race, what are we doing? We have overstepped the boundary of God's authority. So the problem occurs when we give God's authority to man, when we give God's authority to our medical ethics boards, when we give God's authority to scientists who are deciding what they're going to do as they manipulate the human genome and what they're going to do with human embryos. Okay? So there are absolutes. There are two lines that should not be crossed. The first is the line of God's authority. We should not give to man the authority that belongs to God. We said last section that God is the giver and taker of life, and it is God who decides what is right and wrong. Do you want a medical ethics board deciding what is right and wrong for your treatment or for your family? Then what is the second line? The destruction of human life at any stage for any reason. Okay, I'm using it as that in that way. Destruction of human life from the very beginning, at any stage for any life. If a medical procedure involves the destruction of human life, it is unethical and immoral. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about using fetal tissue, it doesn't matter if we're talking about using human embryos, and so forth. All right, this line should not be crossed. If it involves the destruction of human life, it is unethical and immoral. And it doesn't matter if the intentions are good or not. I mentioned in vitro fertilization. Okay, that is the artificial forming of a human embryo and implanting it in a woman who can't have children. Having children is a good thing. But when we cross the line of medical ethics, it's wrong. God is the giver and taker of life. Because in the process of however many techniques they're going to try, they are going to create numerous human embryos and implant several of them and hope that one of them will survive and become a full-term pregnancy. What is that? It's unethical. God gives life, okay? And if it's sad, I understand that, but if a woman can't have children, whose hands is that in? God's. What happens when we put that into man's hands? We have all kinds of unethical things. So, in vitro fertilization is unethical, especially for a Christian, especially for a Christian who claims to believe in God's sovereignty, right? All right, so that's because it oversteps the line, both lines, God's authority and the destruction of human life, because those techniques involve the destruction of human life. It has a good intention, but that doesn't justify the means. You've heard the phrase that the end doesn't justify the means, and that's true. A last thing about the absolutes, we have the two lines that cannot be crossed. God's authority should never be overstepped, and the destruction of human life at any stage for any reason is unethical. My third point here would be that this does not extend to animal life. We don't have the sanctity of animal life. Now we do, the humane treatment of animals is a Bible principle, but the animal kingdom is not on the same level as humanity. So, humane animal research is ethical. Okay, I myself am involved and still am involved in animal research. It's ethical. There's no problem with it because animal life is not human life. And then there's no such thing as animal rights. There are human rights, and human rights are God-given, but there is no such thing as animal rights. Animals are not people. And there's even been legal cases in our country trying to give a chimpanzee legal status as a person. That's ridiculous. But it's kind of logical if you're an evolutionist, isn't it? You see where we're going with this. So there are absolutes that should not be crossed. God's authority should not be overstepped, and the destruction of human life. Okay, we will continue this. There will be no quiz on Thursday.